Right, slightly new setup which I'm testing out. Um, so the video should be a bit better, at least the lighting should be. The sound's gonna probably suck still because there's another bit of work that needs doing on that. But anyway, not a lot to say today just because I've been really busy finishing off the book that I hope will drive a bit of a spike into the heart of the Novus Ordo. It's just been interesting. It's going to be a little bit of a shotgun one, but one of the things that's come up is that I found, I've known this for a while, but I kept resisting the idea that Australians are the most converged, cucked people on the planet. But it's becoming pretty apparent that they probably are. And I mean, they seem to be more politically correct brainwashed than even the Americans, I'd say. It's quite interesting because, on a surface appearance, Australians will pretend to be these rough and tumble guys and whatever. But they're actually very politically correct brainwashed at a very deep level. It's quite interesting. They're buying the whole thing hook, line and sinker about the whole COVID, the masks, wearing, all sorts. It's just weird. But then saying that, because I've always been sort of misanthropic, it's quite weird for me to see, even people that I know through work or whatever, sort of buying the whole show. And it's like, well, haven't you spent enough time on this planet to sort of figure out what things are like? But then I came across a very interesting blog, actually, and a particular blog post. It's called Traditional Catholic Priest. If I remember, I'll put the link below the video. And the post I'm referring to was on June 10th, 2019 by Jonathan Bird, and it's entitled Response to Anne Barnhart and More. So apparently this guy sort of responded to Anne, and he shifted sort of position a little bit in that he never really saw Francis, or rather Bergoglio as he should be called, the fake Pope Francis, as legitimate. But he was kind of hanging on, and then he read a lot of Anne Barnhart, and he came to the conclusion that Ratzinger's probably the Pope, which is of course wrong. But then he kept looking into it and sort of saying, well, but if Bergoglio is a heretic and therefore not the Pope, what's the difference between Bergoglio and Ratzinger and every Pope since 1958 and the whole Vatican II thing happened? I mean, aren't the rules the same for them? And well, yeah, they are. So going back to the documentations, the magisterium of the church that was then and so on, this guy essentially came to the realization that sedeprivation was correct. But it's a very interesting post because it takes you through his own cognitive dissonance and how long it took him to realize the error of his position. And it took him about a year, apparently, I think. And initially he sort of kept going to the Novus Ordo Mass, but he just didn't really, he knew something was wrong. So then eventually he, stopped going to the Mass for a bit and reading all over the internet, and says, but I was disconnected. I didn't know any people that were sedevacantists or sedeprivationists. So I just kind of went along with the Novus Ordo, but didn't feel the same. And then I just thought, no, this online stuff is driving me crazy. Let me just ignore everything, just keep my head down, just go to Mass and just keep doing it. And he says, but of course, when you do that, your soul starts to die, which it does, because, intrinsically, we know what the truth is. And that's what you're seeing all around, this the Chaz, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone and all that stuff. I mean, those guys are living lives of hell. And that's what this guy is saying, it was a living hell. And it was like, I was trying to force myself to believe something that I knew wasn't true. Deep down, I knew wasn't true, but I just thought, I'll carry on. And then, of course, sedevacantists are all supposedly rude, crazy, and they're just vicious, and the comment sections on the internet with sedevacantists are, they're just horrible people. But, you know, after a while he couldn't hack this anymore, so he went back to looking online and stuff, and then he decided to get in touch with a sedevacantist priest. And lo and behold, all of a sudden, he realized, oh, this is what a priest is supposed to be like. And, you know, to use his own words, I don't want to misquote him, but it's quite a long blog post. I don't know if I'll find the bit. Okay. Right, so here it is. Now back to the story. This is sort of towards past the halfway mark, where he's talking about his whole story of, you know, what he did, what he didn't do, and so on. After reading all of this for a month and watching a lot of conferences on YouTube, I was pretty convinced that the position of the sedevacantism was correct. However, it wasn't time for me to accept it fully. Intellectually, I agreed with the position. I took the arguments that I read from the teaching of the Church and spoke with trusted friends and asked their opinions. I said, if this is wrong, show me from the same sources, Church teachings before Vatican II, where it is wrong. Not one person could do that. And indeed, no one can. I've had my challenge up for months now, I think since September of last year, I think at least, to any so-called nominal Catholics, to Anne Barnhart, to whoever, you know, and they can't do it because there is no logical argument against sedevacantism or sedeprivation, whichever, you know, let's just call them sedes because those two terms are interchangeable. Not one person could do that. One person referred to the 1917 Code of Canon Law as a novelty of Pius X. Now, that's so ridiculous. Pius X was one of the most Catholic popes that ever lived, and the Pio-Benedictine Code of Canon Law of 1917, this book that I have right here that I've shown you before, it is an excellent book. I can't see whether you can see the title or not because the light's sort of in my face, but I hope you can. Or maybe I'll bring it closer to the camera, it's better. I don't know. There you go. I think you can see that. Right. You know, it's not cheap. It's like $60, $80, something like that. But if you're at all interested, if you're at all Catholic, get it. It'll change your view also not just of canon law and Catholicism, but of law. Because it's based on Roman law, and Roman law is beautiful, simple and clear. Nothing to do with the legalism that the average American is unfortunately used to, or even the average Englishman for that matter. And it was commissioned by Pius X and finished by Pope Benedictine the 14th or 15th, I can't remember. But you know, it spanned two papacies. It involved really well-learned people in the dogma of the Church and so on. And to say that it was a flight of fancy of Pope Pius X, it's absurd. I mean, that's your defense, really. Plus, it is absolutely the code of law, the magisterium of the Church has approved it. They absolutely verified it. It's got all of the dogma of the Catholic Church in one place, and how to apply it. You know, how to apply Catholic dogma? Canon law. Which brings me to another little point. Some little gamma who just went directly to the gamma grave, who left a comment on the Jay Dyer fight. Because you see, this keeps bubbling up. The Jay Dyer thing is now starting to become even more known about, and more people are reading that whole blog after report after the bum fight. They're starting to figure out that Jay Dyer is an idiot and a liar. And they keep touting some of his same stuff. Vatican I says, no, read Vatican I. Don't pretend to understand what Vatican I says based on what Jay Dyer tells you. Read it. And you've got to understand English, and you've got to understand Roman law. It's very clear. You know, saying, oh, the papacy will be in perpetuity. Yes, it has. It is. The office of the papacy is still there, still exists. It's filled with an impostor. And in perpetuity does not mean immediately one after the other, because that's the same argument as saying, oh, well, if you don't have a pope, then you don't have a church. No. There is no pope. When one pope dies, before you vote the next one in, there's no pope. There's no duration that is limited. How long can you stay without a pope? There is no definition of that. There's never been. There have been times in the church where there was no pope for years at a time. Literally no one at all for a couple of years at a time. But you say, oh, but it's over 60 years. Well, it's a period of over 70 years when the whole time, you either had no pope, 2 pretenders to the throne, or 3 pretenders, and for a period of about 5 years, actually 4 pretenders. So that's longer than 60 years. And if you've got 4 pretenders to the throne for 5 years in a row, and you've had at least 2 for over 70 years, that's going to confuse people. You're going to have a situation where quite a few people are going to get led astray, let's say. So that has happened before. It doesn't always happen in exactly the same way, obviously, but the principles of the law, of canon law, remain the same. So it's important that you understand that the Code of Canon Law of 1917 was the first time. It wasn't the first canon of canon law, but it was the first complete canon law of the Catholic Church, because there were attempts before, but they were pretty good and they lasted for many years. One of them lasted for a few centuries. I can't remember the name of the guy who put it together, but it was sort of like almost like a one-man show effort, that took 20 years to put together and then still had gaps. This was a comprehensive, conclusive collection of all the Catholic dogma and put in one place. Which reminds me, the little gamma that I was telling you about, it says, oh, well, J. Dyer's right, and how can you say that you think Denzinger is irrelevant, or that you didn't know that it was Catholic dogma? First of all, again, I clarified that on the blog. It's absolutely clear, yes, I did know before and after the bum fight with J. Dyer who Denzinger was, and that Denzinger was a book. Now, you can refer to Denzinger as the person, or Denzinger, his work, which was the compilation of various bits of statement, papal encyclicals, and so on, that supposedly compile Catholic dogma. Guess what? All completely irrelevant. If you've never read a word of Denzinger, the book, and even if you don't know who Denzinger was, the person, completely irrelevant, utterly and completely irrelevant. Because as J. Dyer had to admit, even in the video, how do you apply Catholic dogma? That was the question I had to repeat to him several times until he penetrated his thick autistic skull and said, oh, canon law. And then, like a deer in headlights, he realized what he just said. That's right. How you apply Catholic dogma is by canon law. So I don't have to read Denzinger. I don't have to even know who Denzinger is. I did, but it doesn't matter. I don't have to know who Ludwig Ott is. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what some freak compiled hundreds of years ago, or even a saint, or even Thomas Aquinas, or Saint Augustine. It doesn't matter what they put together. It doesn't matter what papal encyclicals they quoted and didn't quote and whatever. It's interesting. You can go and read it and find out for yourself and verify it if you want. But it doesn't matter, because guess what? If you've got a question on how to apply Catholic dogma, right in here. That's it. That's all you need. All right? This and the Catechism of Trent, the Catholic Catechism of Trent, they'll do. You've got pretty much everything you need. A Bible, a Doami Remi Bible, and a Missal, and you've got everything you need to be a Catholic, and then some, more than most Catholics will ever have. So, that's the importance of the Code of Canon Law. But let me continue what this guy wrote. So one person referred to the 1917 Code of Canon Law as a novelty of Pius X. One person said he couldn't refute it, but feels it is wrong. They feel it. So there's no logic, there's no reasoning, there's no objective facts, they just feel it, right? You get the idea. I've yet to read or talk to one single person that actually read all of the arguments for the sedevacantism and actually be able to disprove it using the above criteria. In fact, I find that those that argue against it tend to fall into error themselves, most notably saying that a heretic can be the head of the Catholic Church, which is heresy itself, indeed. In other words, if you saying that a heretic can be the Pope, you are heretic yourself for saying that. And you become a public heretic, by the way, which means that you lose any office you had, by the way, which is why all the pretend clerics of the pretend Catholic Church, the Novus Ordo, are not valid clerics, because they are, by their actions and by their statements and by the continued promulgation of Vatican II heresy, stating, accepting, and publicly declaring that they accept heresy and that they promulgate heresy and that they accept absolute heretics like the fake popes as valid. That makes them heretics, which makes them vacate their office. And if you're a nominal Catholic that thinks that Bergoglio is the Pope because you're ignorant, ignorance in itself does not make you a heretic, but it's certainly a sin for you to be so lazy as to not educate yourself on the matter. It's certainly a sin for you to be slothful, one of the 7 deadly ones. Anyway, so what did I do? Well, at first I was confused. I didn't have anyone in the Sede camp to talk to. All I had was books, videos, and prayer. I reached out to a Sede priest and I didn't get anywhere at first. It was strange. I could see the truth of it, but I was in a barren wasteland at the moment. Soon we would be having another child, and I had so many thoughts going through my head. Who will baptize him? Who will provide us with sacraments? What is going on? Are all the priests not validly ordained? Where is the church? You get the idea. I had a ton of questions. I didn't have a lot of answers at the moment. This spell lasted for 6 months. It wasn't time yet for me. I ended up going back to my diocesan Latin Mass parish. I did this against my better judgment. I wanted Mass and something stable for my family. I was so tired of trying to understand things and not getting anywhere. I was so fed up with blogs as well as they typically sowed discord. When I went back, I refused to read blogs. I refused to read the news. I refused to do anything other than just go to Mass and keep my head down and get home. I said I couldn't understand it, so I was going to do my best, go to a Mass and say my prayers. This sounds good in theory, but in practice, it was horrible. This is an honest man. You see, I knew too much already. Pandora's box was already open. There was no going back. This reverting was an act of disobedience. It was a lack of faith. It was a putting my hand to the plow and then looking back. That was one of the longest years of my life. I traveled all around the country visiting different masses in each city we stopped in. I kept my keep your nose clean and don't cause trouble mindset, went to Mass, then went back to my day-to-day life. Mass was simply an obligation at that point. It was something that I did because I was supposed to, but my heart wasn't in it, as I knew there was something terribly wrong. This is absolutely important to understand, because a lot of people, and I was one of them, before I was a Christian, before I understood any of this stuff, the concept of spending hours of my Sunday going to a Mass was just like, who the hell does that? Even if you believe that, it's such a waste of time. Oh my God, it's so boring. Oh, it's fucking pointless. I was one of those guys, right? And then I started to read and whatever. Eventually I converted. By the time I converted, I had been to observe proper Catholic Masses. And it was a completely different experience. Now, I can tell you with absolute certainty, every single time that I've attended Mass, proper Mass, not Novus Ordo Mass, real Mass, it is without exception always an astonishingly positive, awesome experience. Now, there are times, like with training, I relate a lot of Catholic stuff to my martial arts training, because a lot of times at training, you're like tired, you're banged up, you've already got a broken hand or bust ribs or something. It's the last thing you want to do. It's like, oh man, I don't want. Just get your bag, get your kit, go. Get to the dojo, change. And they're not always good. Unlike the Mass, training sessions can be bad. You can get injured, you can be hurt, you can have an off day, you're sick, and you get pummeled on top of it. You get injuries that you carry with you for the rest of your life in some cases. So it's not always positive. But most of the times, whenever you felt like, nah, I don't want to go, and then you did, it turns out to be one of the better classes, especially if you keep the right mental attitude. Now, there are times when, it's time to go to Mass and it's like, oh man, I don't get sleep. I got little kids. running around the whole time. It's the last day of the weekend. Oh, maybe I could just, sit around and fucking do something else, read a book, or just spend some time with my wife, and maybe if I can just play with the kids just enough to like put them to bed early and whatever, the usual story. But it's like training. As soon as you get up and you go there every time, and the difference with training is that training can be a bad day. I've never had a Catholic mass where I walked out of it and thought, nah, that was a waste of time. Not once, not for 1 minute, not for 1 second. And I'm telling you that if you told the me before what I'm telling you now, I would have thought you're talking shit, that you have to be some kind of zealot to think that way, all right? Honest to God, that's hand on heart, that's what I would have thought. But I'm telling you now, I was wrong, right? So, and that's what's happening to this guy, because he's going to a fake mass. Now, if you had to go to a fake mass, that is absolutely soul destroying. Now, if you're an atheist and you're saying, oh, but I don't believe, so I don't think, don't worry about it. Just go to a real mass. Go to a seded mass, right? Go to a proper seded mass. Just sit in the back and watch. What's it going to cost you? A few hours of one Sunday, right? Just go check it out. Just go see it. I would suggest actually first go see a Novus Ordo mass. Just go check out a Novus Ordo mass. That's going to be boring, waste your time, and it's going to look like crap. Just doesn't matter. Just go for it. Then go see a seded mass. Go see one of them. And I'm telling you that you will absolutely feel the difference. And by the way, I've got emails from people that have read Believe. I've got emails from people that listen to the videos that have said they've done that. They've taken my advice, they've just done that. And they're like, oh my God, you were right. It was awesome. Some of them are cradle Catholics. Some of them are not Catholics at all. But they have all found something good about it, So, look, you don't have to do it, but just I suggest, if you're interested, go for it. So it goes on. Mass was simply an obligation at that point. It was something that I did because I was supposed to, but my heart wasn't in it, as I knew there was something terribly wrong. Of course, this mindset does something to the soul. It kills it. You see, Jesus wants our hearts. He's jealous. He wants all of us, not just our Sunday mornings. He wants every thought, every word, every action. He wants to fill us with himself and conform us to his image. Right, then he goes on a bit about what that means, and yeah, well, actually it's worth reading. The problem was I couldn't do that. Why? How can I give myself to something I don't believe in? With the Novus Ordo Church, he calls it Novus Ordo, but whatever, the Novus Ordo Church, I knew there was something terribly wrong. I knew that Jesus couldn't be united to that. I knew that Jesus desires something different. But lest I sound like I was super spiritual, the reverse was more true. This was a time of falling away, not in externals, but internals. The prayers we prayed were merely that. The family rosary was just another part of the day, much like eating, dinner, and sleeping. The heart was missing. This was spiritual aridity such as I have only experienced once prior in my life, and that was what I always referred to my desert experience. In short, it totally sucked. Then he goes on about how it lasted a long time, and goes on a bit more. Eventually comes, I emailed another Catholic, sedevacantist priest to talk to him. I found something I didn't expect. I found love. Did I find this nasty, mean-spirited, crazy sede? Nope. It was the exact opposite. I found the faith that was once delivered. I found that I no longer had to try to explain away all the chaos. I found priests that had one thing on their mind, the salvation of souls. I found heroic charity, perseverance, under constant fire. I found souls that endured sufferings the like we could never understand. I also found laughter. I found joy. I found peace. I found what I was promised from the beginning. I found the pearl of Christ's price, the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. Now he comes to a part that I quite enjoy, arguing with a Protestant. Have you ever had a discussion with a Protestant about faith? You can bring up how the church was founded, you can bring up the saints, the doctors, the councils, and you can even bring up Where did you get the Bible from? And yet they still can't seem to put the dots together. You have to wonder why they can't see it. Why can't they look at what is so completely and totally obvious and backed up by 2,000 years of church history? Popes, magisteriums, canon law, and they still can't see it. It defies logic and drives you crazy. It doesn't drive me crazy, but yes, it does defy logic. Of course, I'm not really talking about Protestants. I'm talking about those that are trying to say that the sedevacantist position is false. It doesn't really matter what I write here today. I can point to every link known to man showing every single quote from this saint or that one, or this pope or that one, or this canon law, etc. And if the heart ain't in it, it ain't going to stick. This is one of the reasons I refuse to reinvent the wheel. The truth is out there. It's staring you in the face. It's everywhere and evident to a little child. But that is the problem. We don't want to be the little child that simply trusts his loving father. We want every question answered before we give assent. We want every problem solved. We want a perfectly straight and paved road with lots of rest stops. We don't want to take the road less traveled, that is full of sacrifices, full of crosses that lead to our death. And we can't see the road ahead and don't want to have that type of faith. That faith is too heroic. That faith is for the saints. I just don't want to go to hell. In choosing just to try to get along and ignore the facts, I chose hell. It carries on. There's a very good... It's a very good blog because it gets to the heart of cognitive dissonance, which is experienced by anybody who essentially denies reality in favor of their own ego and identity. Now that sounds very bad. It sounds like, oh, you're just such a selfish, narcissistic egomaniac that you can't face reality. There is a lot of truth to that. But in many instances, what it is, it's an even more primal thing than that. It's we create in our own mind an idea of who we are. And a lot of people link a lot of things that have got nothing to do with who you are with their self-identity. So they think, I'm a Catholic, a Novus Ordo Catholic, and oh, well, you know, I can't change that. If I were going to change that, I'd have to be somebody else. Now, you got to understand that if you've been lied to and brainwashed into believing nonsense, that's not you. That is how you present. That is how you behave. But that's not who you are. Okay, a belief, an idea, a concept is predicated and based on foundations. If those foundations are false, then your idea is false. It doesn't matter whether you like it or not. It doesn't matter whether you identify with it or not. Now, I'm somewhat lucky in that I don't have, my baseline concept of myself is so basic. It's literally so primitive that it doesn't deal, it doesn't need to hang on to false ideas. I mean, the prime example is karate. I did karate for decades, fanatically. And then the day I met a Russian guy that I couldn't touch no matter what I did, I was like, okay, well, obviously whatever I spent the last 30-something years doing, well, just wasn't good enough. Better start again. And that's it. As of the next day, I just started training with the Russians instead of going back to karate. Now, don't get me wrong, I got a lot of good stuff out of karate, but also some stuff that wasn't that good, but that's just life. But that's it. I dropped it from the day and started training with the Russians. And in that training with the Russians, I had to undo a lot of bad habits, a lot of things that just don't work very well if you actually want to be somewhat decent at surviving bad encounters. So this is the same. You might identify as a cradle Catholic, or you might identify as a Protestant, but don't be scared. What are you afraid of? Why are you afraid of going to read the patristic fathers from the first 200 years? Before 200 AD, there's volumes of information that you can read. And most of it's been translated into English or whatever language you speak. What are you afraid of doing? You say you're a Christian, of whatever kind. Well, why are you scared to read what happened right at the beginning? Why are you scared to read what happened 300 years after or 400 years after? Why are you scared of reading what the canonical books of the Bible are, which was listed out in various ecumenical councils before 500 AD? And then you go and see what Luther, your buddy Luther, did, good old Martin, pulling books out of the Bible and whatever. Now, Marco complained about, Luther himself didn't physically take any books out of the Bible. Well, that's kind of bullshit, because, he did. He changed their value, let's say, and he most definitely essentially reduced books like James. I wonder why James. Read James about justification by faith alone. Yeah, read James. Why is James not in the Protestant Bibles? And Marco did give Marco's an honest guy, so I'm not accusing him of lying or anything like that. And he mentioned something very interesting that I didn't know, which was that apparently some Scottish guys that wanted to produce Bibles for whatever said, oh, well, we want to get as much bang for the buck as we can, so can you print the Bibles without all the apocrypha, all the stuff that Luther thought wasn't good to read, although it was part of the Bible for, since the beginning. And why wasn't it good to read? Well, because it went against what Luther wanted. See, you've got to understand, if you're a Protestant and you're reading a Protestant Bible, you're not reading the Bible. You're reading Luther's idea of what the Bible should be. On top of which, if you're a King James guy, well, then you're reading not only what Luther wanted you to read, but one that's been edited by literal Pharisees for 700 years before it was translated. So once again, you really want to go back to the Vulgate, because that's a much better translation of the original Bible, of the Hebrews, of the Old Testament, than anything a Protestant has ever read. So, yeah. Sorry, Protties. Turns out you're wrong again. So, yes, I know I've got a rhetorical style that's very uncomfortable for most of you, but that's because you need cattle prods to move cattle. And if you haven't spent time figuring this stuff out by yourself and you're just going along to get along, guess what? You're cattle. You might object to me calling you cattle, but you're cattle. You are not the guy who's climbing a mountain by himself to find out what's on the other side. You're cattle. You're going down the wide path to hell, right? So there it is, a little bit of ideas on how to get past your own cognitive dissonance. And it's not just about religion. Cognitive dissonance applies in many, many areas of life. And it usually has to do with people not having to confront the fact that they're wrong, and therefore having to change what they think is their core being. Yeah. Now, admittedly, everybody has core parts of you that you don't want to change. For example, I don't know, pretty much nothing is going to get me to think that it's okay to rape children. I just think that's completely evil, and anybody that does that should be put to death. That is my absolute personal opinion. I believe it should be made law, and I would very much do whatever I can to see to it that any country or city, state, or whatever that I ever choose to settle down in would seriously consider making those changes to their laws so that pedophiles can be burnt at the stake in the public square. And if you did create such a city-state, I'm Venetian, so I always keep thinking back, well, maybe one day when I've got the time and I do have the inclination, but I've got other things to do first. Maybe when I'm an old man, like Jean Perizot de Valette, I might just return to Venice and decide to make it a republic again. And if and when that happens, hypothetically, let's say I'm successful and I become Doge, I would immediately institute the burning of pedophiles at the stake. You'd have to have some pretty strong proof. There would have to be some pretty strong evidence that you are indeed a child rapist. But if that has been deemed a fact, then I would set it up in St. Mark's Square and I would have the pedophiles burnt at the stake in St. Mark's Square. I wouldn't force people to watch it, you wouldn't have to attend, but I would definitely do it in the public square. Now you might think that that's brutal, horrific, criminal, blah, blah, blah. As I said, it would not be criminal because I would change the laws to make it legal. Guess what? After the first 5 pedophiles that get burnt in St. Mark's Square at the stake, guess how many pedophiles you would have in Venice after that? 0. Because any pedophiles that did remain in Venice would be very, 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 very likely to move, or at least curb their sick disease in whatever fashion they needed to do, because even if they can't get their jollies off raping some kid, well, that's preferable to, being burnt at the stake. So they would be able to control their urges, and those who can't would eventually be caught and burnt at the stake. I would put it to you that within a year, that's an extremely long time. I reckon within a week, but within a year, there would be no pedophiles left in La Serenissima at all. And I think that applies to any other city, or any other state, any other country where that became the law. Which is why I say it would be a civilizing thing. So, you have to keep in mind that, I went off the path here because I was talking about your self-identity, but, pedophiles burnt at the stake. I mean, how can I resist? So, when it comes to stuff like that, just take a moment to examine yourself and to think, who am I? Is this really a fundamental part of who I am? What if I find out tomorrow, let's say you're a Muslim, let's say you're watching this, you're a Muslim, and you find out tomorrow that, oh, Islam was a complete lie. And by the way, I know Muslims, ex-Muslims, that came to that conclusion. One is a very good friend of mine, and another one is a lady that I communicated with briefly many years ago, and then we sort of reconnected a little bit online and so on. And she didn't believe me at first when I said, well, you say you're Muslim, but what about this, what about that? And she thought I was just making shit up. And I said, look, I'm not making anything up. Go read your Quran, go read the hadiths. You say you're Muslim, go check your own stuff out. You don't take my word for it. And after a while, she came back and she was like, man, you're right. I thought you were just talking shit, but I didn't even know that. We never get told that. We never get taught that. And she's quite clearly not a observant Muslim today. But that's all I'm saying. Just re-examine your own positions. They're not always as correct as you think, and it doesn't mean that you are unsalvageable, or that you're completely broken, or that you have to completely restructure yourself. It's like a t-shirt, right? Now, there are some parts of me that, are never going to change. Like, I'm never going to think pedophilia is okay. That's like inside. You to change that, you'd have to cut my heart out and my brain out, and then I'd still just be a dead body. I still wouldn't believe it, But for me to change, is a Sistema more effective in karate? That's a t-shirt for me, dude. Yeah, I spent 30 years in these t-shirts, but that's a better t-shirt. Oh, this one's got a few holes in it now after 30 years, and it doesn't actually protect me from the weather, and I never realized it's a bit scratchy. That's pure cotton, and I'll switch right now. Doesn't say anything about me. To me, maybe other people will think that. Maybe other people will judge that. Maybe the guys I used to train with will think that I betrayed them or their dojo or their training or the concept. But I did no such thing. I know what my heart is like. I'm loyal to my friends. I'm loyal to the things I choose to be loyal to, and I was loyal to karate for many years, and even the ideology of karate, I was very loyal to it for a long time. And but of course, if I find something better, it doesn't mean that my loyalty to those things that I was doing in the past is non-existent. It just means I found a better way. You know, like if you were, you know, I don't know, a highway robber. You know, you just, that's how you survive. That's how you do your living. You just rob people. And then over time, you realize, oh, actually robbing people is not the only way. I could just get a job as a farmhand, and it's harder, but, you know, in some ways it's better. And then you go through that, and you become a farmer, and then you work your way up, and you become an honest citizen, and you, like, you know, you stop robbing people, and you start becoming a good, productive member of society. Your robber friends are going to say, oh, you betrayed us. Well, did you? No, you didn't turn any of them in. You didn't go shoot them. And they're bad guys. You know, this is a pretty bad example, because if you were a good guy, you should stop those guys. At least go back to them and say, hey, come here, come do this with me instead of that, you know. Now, with martial arts, there's no real need for me to do that. I did speak to my instructor, I spoke to other people, and I said, look, for me this is better, it works better, I think it's more effective, but, you know, everybody's got to choose what they want to do. We're not robbing people. If you want to get punched in the face by these guys instead of these guys, hey, who am I to complain? You know, go get punched in the face by whoever you prefer. You know, it makes no difference to me. Similarly, who I get punched in the face by, well, that's my choice, right? So leave me to it. But yeah, re-examine your own concepts of who you are, or what you believe. And honestly, if you're a Protestant, or if you're a cradle Catholic, do a bit of history, do a bit of research. Read up on the Code of Canon Law of 1917. Read up on what the sedevacantist position is and why it exists. Just find out, you know. That's it. That's my sermon for the Sunday done. Oh, and like I said, got a new light, so go ahead and tell me how shiny my bulb pate is. And I've even got one of these. That means I can switch off from over here, so I don't have to, like, lean over and stuff. Plus, you can get to see all my hand movements now. Lovely. Well, good night. If this works, I'm off.